All right. Sorry about that, everybody. I took about 7 tries to get this done, so Quade's over there and Sebastian are probably about ready to beat me with a stick. So you have an assignment this week that says, I need to turn this in as a PY file. And so we went through on the last video of how to install Python. Real quick overview, Python lives at python.org. And you can get versions for about everything. So here it automatically on download says, hey, you need it for Windows. When you download that, I have ran into one issue with some of the Macs. If you have a Mac that is not updated to the latest version, so you've got something other than Big Sur, you may have to run a previous version to get it to work correctly. So if you run into that, email me or try a previous version. So uninstall and then try a previous version to see if that will work for you. Well, your assignment this week, and we're going to talk about a few things that are a little different than what the book has for some content. So we're going to put a few pieces in here. So what we're going to do is you're going to build a car buying application. So we're going to get a price in. You're going to add some modifications. And we all know that when you go buy a vehicle, or if you haven't had that experience, it is torturous. You're going to get asked about everything from, do you want your windows etched with a VIN number, to all different kinds of questions. So we can come up with some options. You're going to have to figure in sales tax, and you're going to also then have to output to the screen a final price and show the buyer's name. So that also means that you need to input a user's name. So we're going to work with both numeric data and we're going to work with string data in this assignment. So what I always like to do, and I usually scratch it out on paper because it's easier, is I kind of write a block diagram of what I need my program to do. So at the beginning of my program, we'll call it like the header section, I need to figure out what my variables are. And I like to scratch out as much of those variables up front as I can. That way when I read my program and I look at it, I have them already up at the top. They're easy to see. So we have our variables. So we'll have to figure out what our variables are. And then we need some form of, you're going to have an action. So you're going to get in inputs. You're going to perform math. You're going to do string manipulation. And then finally, you're going to have some kind of an output. And then we're going to close our program. So we're going to do all of these kinds of things, and we're going to do it in that idle environment. So we're not going to jump into Cengage. We're going to write our own program. So we can actually use some Scratchpad, and we can actually think about here, what are we going to use for variables? So I say we're going to take in a car price. So a good variable is descriptive. In other words, it tells us what it is. So I could say the car price for the used car we are buying. Well, there's going to be a little problem with that. The first problem is I put spaces in there. Can't do those. So, all right. And if I went back and I said, I'm going to put underscores in here, I shouldn't have done quite so many of those. So now I have a valid variable name. But it's too long, and I actually use both kinds of annotation. So I did both camel casing here at the beginning, and then I started doing underlines. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to delete that. And I think in our case, we can probably figure out that car price we could use as a variable. It describes the car price. Now, if we wanted to keep it a little cleaner, because we know at the bottom we're going to have a final total, we could even say car price initial or something, but I think we'll just leave it as car price for now. Well, we also know that we're going to need a a buyer. So I'm just going to use the term buyer as a variable. That seems fairly descriptive. Well, one of the things I hate, and you'll find that in most programming languages, people are not fond of it, is the idea of mystery variables. So I know that I have a sales tax, and you guys can't see me pointing at the screen, so that's kind of funny, but I know that I have a variable that I need for sales tax. Could I just put in 7%? Sure. But it's not a really great way to do that, because then I just have this mystery number floating around in my program. So I'm going to write a variable called sales tax, and I'm going to then assign it that value. So I'm just showing you what it would look like. So there, we know car price and buyer we're taking in as an input statement of some kind. Sales tax is something that we can calculate then and come up with a number. So the other thing we need to look at is what kind of other things is a dealership going to charge us for? So if you've bought a vehicle anytime in the last 20 years, they start to add on a lot of other fees. So there may be my favorite one is this one, because they have to prepare the paperwork, and so they call it a doc fee. There may be a car prep, or we'll just call it prep fee. They may charge for washing the car and all kinds of different things. So maybe you bought in and you did undercoating. So we could have a price for that. And just to keep us consistent, I might do it this way. So that way when I look at those, I know that those are all ones that come up. So other things, you may have a warranty fee. So they may say, well, you bought this beautiful new car that's super reliable. Now that you bought it, let me set you up for another $3,000 for a warranty to protect that vehicle that we said was reliable, but now we're going to tell you it's going to break down, so you have to buy a warranty for it. And we could go on and on and on. That should be enough for our purposes. So we have some variables. We also are going to have some in the end. So we know we're going to have to add a price. So we might just call it final price. But I also have one other, and I'm going to put it up ahead of that one, because to calculate that sales tax, we're actually going to need a subtotal. So we can add everything together and then take the sales tax. And we may actually want to show, so here we have sales tax. So we may also need if we want to display that amount, you would need one for sales tax. And we could call it value or cost. So that way we could output all of things out to the screen. So far we've got our header, we've got our close program, we've got some math that we know we're going to need to do. We're going to manipulate the string a little bit, and we're going to create some form of output. Perfect. All right, I think we're ready to begin. And honestly, we could write this in Notepad, but we have idle available. So I'm going to start idle. And which one is going to pop it? All right. So this first screen that pops up, this is our interactive screen. We could write it in this, but it doesn't give us an easy way to save it or to utilize it in the future. So I'm going to click File New. And by clicking that File New, I open up a window that looks like this. So I'm going to move this over to the left. I'm going to move this over here to the right so I can see it. All right. So this allows us to create a file, and then we're going to save it, and then that will be the file that you upload. So I want to go through some of the basics of this. First thing we need to do with any of our files is we want to know who you are and who's sending this in. So at the very beginning, if you did a comment tag, you could put in your name, you could put in the number of the assignment, and you can actually use, so the other way to do that is we can use some triple quoted strings. I prefer the hashtag. It's just a matter of preference. So even if I have multiple lines, so assignment for CMIS 210. First Python program in idle. So I just want to be descriptive about what it is. And I want you to use those fairly liberally so you can understand what we're doing. So I often will do this. So variables. That way I can document what I'm doing in this section. And so this might be math, operations, and this might be closing. So I can use these documentation tabs to do a lot of different things for us. So I have some of these I know that I can set up pretty easily, but I'm going to skip car price and buyer to start with for just a second. And I'm actually going to change my variable just a little bit. I'm never going to change sales tax inside of this program, so I'm going to write it as a, so it's a constant. Now, so I'm going to capitalize it, which tells us that, and I'm just going to write it all as one word. Sales tax. I'm going to use the assignment operator of an equals, and I'm going to say it's not 7%, but 0.07. So our computer will hiccup a little bit if we put 7% in there. So that sales tax, by capitalizing it, we indicate whenever somebody reads that that is a constant. It can change during the program. That's one thing that Python doesn't have, is it doesn't allow you to lock a value in. But we're going to call it a quasi-constant so that we know what it is. So my next one I'm going to have is I'm going to have doc fee. So I'm going to make up a number for that. I'm just going to use 299. I'm going to come up with a prep fee. I'm going to call that $4.99. And you can come up with whatever numbers you want to. You can come up with your own charges. Just remember that whatever name you use, you're going to have to remember here in a little bit. An undercoating fee, warranty fee. All right, so I've got a couple of extra charges in there. And now I need to figure out, how do I get input from my user? And so I know that there is this input, but how do I use it? So if I say buyer, I'm going to use that same assignment operator that I've used before. So the equals sign doesn't really mean equals in this case. It's an assignment operator. It says everything to the right of that equals sign gets shoved into the left. And so I'm just going to use an input command, and it'll actually give me a little direction on there. So input, and now I can put a text string in there and say, please enter your first and last name, colon, and then I'm going to put a space so it'll look a little more professional, and I got to make sure I close it with a parenthesis. And so when I do that, notice everything in this string is greenish, and there's a whatever color this is, a purplish color it looks like. So we can see that it's doing something. And we need to next come up with the car price. So same formula, so car price equals input. Now here's where we're going to go a little different. So you're going to ask, please enter the price of your fine new ride. Now, when I get it this way, that car price, remember, that input always inputs a string. Is a string what we want, or do we need a value of some sort? We need a value. So I'm going to combine it. So I'm going to show you actually two different ways. So here I could do this. Car price equals int, if we wanted to create an integer of car price. So it takes car price, shoves it into this formula, converts it to an integer. Well, that works, but I want to make life a little easier because I like to be lazy. I'm going to do it right up here, and I can do it, and I can convert that entire input string at the same time. But I think what I really want is a float. And I want a float because I'm going to manipulate it, and I want some decimal fractions in there. So now I need to make sure that I have my second ending parenthesis, and now it should take that price of the car and convert it to a float. So I like to check my work, so I'm going to put in a check statement here. So I'm just going to do a print, and I'm going to put in buyer, comma, car price. So I can run this program as its current state and see what happens. So to do that, I'm going to click up here to go run. And run module, or F5. And it says, oh, we got to save it first. Good call. And it's really good about that. And where it wants to save it is in this Python library. Well, that's not where I want it. I'm going to put it in my documents so I know where it's at. And maybe I create a folder, but I need to make sure I know where it's at. And so this is going to be my car program. And I'm going to click save. So now I've saved this. And now it runs. Please enter your first and last name. Please enter the price. So $26,500. And notice it does output both items, and it's converted this to a float. So notice it's got a decimal point in it. Nifty. All right, so our program works as designed, and I can just come back here. So I wanted to use that as a test, but I don't want to run it all the time. So I'm going to pop that hashtag out in front, or the pound sign, and now it's going to say, oh, okay. It's not going to run that line. So I know that I can get a first and a last name and the price of my car. That piece works pretty well. So now I need to come down here and do a little math. And so in those variables, one of the ones I came up with was I said I needed a subtotal. So I'm going to do something a little weird, and I'm going to assign it the value 0 up top. And that assigning it a value of 0 is just kind of a garbage collection. So that makes sure that if something else uses that variable or whatever else goes wrong, when this program runs, it actually assigns it a 0 to start with. That way there's nothing left over in there. So I need to calculate what my subtotal then will be as this program runs. So subtotal is going to be equal to the car price plus our doc fee plus our prep fee plus our undercoating fee plus our warranty fee. All right, and if I spelled all those correctly, then when I run this program, that should run really well, and it should give me a total, or a subtotal. So I will then add a test case, and I'll say subtotal. Now, when we're doing this, make sure that you have yours correct. And I actually deliberately took off an extra E here to show you what happens. If I don't copy those correctly, then we'll see what's going to happen. So this should fail. Let's try it. So run module. Yep, it's got to save it again. So too lazy to type. 20,000. Oh, and so notice what it says. Name undercoating fee is not defined. All right, so I got to figure out what it's doing because it didn't even get to my deliberately misspelled one. So let's go back and take a look. And so I called it undercoating. Now notice what I did. I capitalized that U. Well, that's enough to drive it crazy. And it would also then do the same error with my warranty fee. So Now let's run it again. It will save. All right, so let's take a look. And I bet what I did was I copied that variable wrong. And I did. As I'm trying to type and talk, I always want to capitalize that first letter, and we usually leave it. So let's try it one more time, see if I can manage to make this work. I have an interesting new name. All right, so it added all those up and gave me an output. Great. So we're on to something. We're getting closer. So we know that subtotal seems to work. It gets us a subtotal. So somewhere over here, I said we have a sales tax cost, and we're going to calculate that next. And so we're going to call it sales tax cost, and we're going to assign that the value of subtotal times sales tax. So that'll give us how much tax there is on this vehicle. And we have another variable we're going to call final price. And we know that that is going to be sales tax cost plus our subtotal. So now we have all the items in here. We can run it and double check our math and make sure everything works. So I'm going to put in another one down here. I'm going to print. So I want to print subtotal I'm not making this very neat. I'm not doing anything fancy. I just want to see if the values are right. Sales tax cost, final price. So now, if I run this, and it saves, let me move that up a little bit so it's easier to see. So first and last name. Enter the price of your fine new ride. Let's go $32,500. So it's going to calculate. There's my subtotal, my tax, and my total price of the vehicle. Sweet. So now we can go through here and we can start cleaning this up, and we can make this a little more user-friendly. Because right now it doesn't tell you a whole lot, and it's not user-friendly. I've got the bones in it, but now I need to come in and do some cleanup. So one of the cleanups I might do is, notice I put subtotal in there as 0. So from a security standpoint, it probably would be good to do all of those values that I calculate later on, sales tax cost, and set it equal to 0 at the beginning of my program. So usually we call this a variable declaration. So this is one area where Python is nice to us, but it also doesn't show us that kind of proper format. So in almost every other language, we have to declare our variables, say what kind of variable they are, and assign some limits to that variable before we ever use it. In Python, we get this ability to just create variables anywhere we want, on the fly, and we don't even have to tell it what kind of variable it is. It takes that from what value it gets in. So Python makes our life kind of easy here, but it's not a bad idea to look at those variable names and make sure they're in there. It's just kind of a garbage collection, just making sure. So if there's another one we had, so we should have final price equals 0. So the other thing that this does, say I run this multiple times, is I always make sure that it sets all those values to 0. So subtotal, final price, all of my are set to 0. I can even do that with my buyer. Now, because I know that I'm going to use that as a string, I set it as an empty string so that it's all empty. So when this program runs, and once we start looking in the next couple weeks at some loops, that makes a lot more sense that we clean everything out, reset it to its default values, and then we come on. All right, so we've got this piece kind of cleaned up. It would be probably a nice thing to have some text at the beginning. So you can come up with some print statements. You could use some triple quotes. So this is a program to show you the cost of your car. What I can also do then, using some of those escape characters, I can get it to shove down my text and do some other things. So now, when it prints, except I forgot to do something weird. What did I forget to put in there? Somewhere in there I have an issue. I'll fix it here. So, random keys here. So that says it can't read that string because there's something wrong with it. So it's still showing that. I must have another comment in there somewhere. There we go. All right. So you can clean this up, add some things in there. So you could even add, if I wanted to add something else unique. So instead of just a buyer name, it might be handy to, say, create a variable called make equals, we could then ask the buyer equals input, please enter the make of your car. So you could do like a make and model. So you can make this a lot prettier on the inputs. You could add something there. On the outputs then, now you need to come up with something here a little more substantial. So I'm going to eliminate that and eliminate my print here. So you're going to need to come up with a way to print out those values. And so you can certainly embed them. You can do all different kinds of things with them from your text. The very last thing I need to do, since this is a program we're going to run on our own computer, and I hinted about it, is you need to have an escape or a closing. So I'm going to put it above this so you guys can see it. I always use, and there's other ways to do it, but the easiest way I found is an empty input string. So that input string will wait for you to put something in. It doesn't have to go anywhere. And something like, please enter any key to exit. And what that does is hold this program open so it doesn't just close immediately after it runs. And so if I'm running this independently and not inside of this idle environment, if I don't have some way to hold it open, that's what will happen. It'll run, blink, and done. So I'm going to go run this real quick and see if this is going to look what I would like it to. All right. So it's way at the bottom. May have to figure out a way to work on that. So put my name in, the make of your model of your car. So I might want to put something else in there. A Torino. The price of my new car is $15,789.23. So right now I don't have any print out options. So, but notice here it says please enter any key to exit, and then it will actually break. So what happens, and I don't know, it'll probably pop up in the wrong window, so it's going to be hard for me to show you this, but if I look at the program I've just created, under, where did I put it? Car program here. So I have this program here, and it will run if I just double click it. And so if I drag it over here, now it's in a black screen because it's just running independently. So enter your first and last name. And so now it waits to exit. But watch what happens when I hit this last enter key. Boom, it disappears. If I don't have that input holding it open, your program will run and disappear before you can ever get anything useful out of it. So this is then the program that you need to turn in. So it should have your name inside of it, but if you would like, this is not a bad strategy to do, is you can also put your name on the file. So I could call this Brad Griffin first assignment. And that way that there's two ways I could identify it. But I will ask that you please put this in the top of your program. So that way if I download them in bulk or I grab it in any way, I know immediately and very quickly whose assignment this is. I also would encourage you to put as much documentation in here as possible. So I might actually put in there something like, this calculates, not that I can spell calculate, the final price. And that way I can see what you're trying to do, and when you look back on these later, you can see what's happening. So if you have a very complex program, you can look at it later and you can see, aha, I needed to do something else. So that is IDLE in a nutshell. So we are giving you the IDLE. This is the environment we're most often going to run in. It does have a few other things. So I can actually check a module. It doesn't do a whole lot necessarily in here. There's some better programs if we're going to do that. Most commonly I use the run module. The other one I use is over here in the format. So we haven't got to this yet in Python, but Python is very highly dependent on indents. And so those indent commands get to be important. So I can indent a section because we're going to use those as blocks. So this is how Python says all this is going to run inside another command or a blocked input. So we use those a lot. So be aware where those formattings are. So you can also then, I need to go backwards so I can dedent a region. It'll even let you do, if you really wanted to, do that, and it takes an entire area and comments it out. So if I have some problems running code, sometimes I'll block out a piece or an area. So those are always handy. The Control-Z does work in here. This one isn't quite as easy to use as some of the others, but it teaches you some of that structure. That's why these names up here are kind of handy, because then I can look at it and make sure I've put in the right variable name. That's typically where I see the most problems, is the variable names aren't matching what's down in the code. Because we thought we said sales tax and we typed it wrong one place or the other. So watch those. This closing statement, the book doesn't talk about that a lot, so that's a handy piece for us. And as long as you're staying inside of this IDLE environment, but it's kind of nice to send a file to your friends or somebody else and say, hey, run this. They can just double click and run that file. So that is your assignment that we've went through. So you should be able to get 100% on that one. Make sure that when you submit it, that you are submitting this file here, this .py file. So it's got to be the .py file. All right. There should be another little area about some of the content in this. Make sure you do, I'm not logged into Blackboard so I can't show you, make sure you do all the assignments that are in Cengage. If you have any difficulties, let me know and I will try to figure out if it's a Cengage issue or if it's an issue on our side. This one seems to have been behaving. I do have another class at Cengage has got some hiccups. So if you run into that, let me know and I may have you reach out to Cengage support, or I'll see if it's something that we can correct very quickly.